Interviewing Bryant Thomas, longtime AP newsman, now living in New Hampshire, where the first in the nation primary is soon to take place.
Don't remind me.
How significant is it still that whoever comes strong out of Iowa first, the caucus, and then New Hampshire a little bit later, how important is that for a bandwagon effect? Still as much as it used to be in previous days?
Well, I think not so much this year, only because they've changed the primary schedule. Super Tuesday is a lot sooner. It's in the first part of March. It was later in the month in 2016. So there isn't as much time for any momentum gatherer to do his or her thing. As a result, it may take a little more than just New Hampshire to hone in on a clear-cut front runner.
But also, Brian, what I'm getting at is that in the old days, whichever Democrat came out of the New Hampshire primary, they were pretty much a standard candidate. You didn't have such a wide spectrum where you have Bernie on one end of it, being painted as a bomb-throwing Bolshevik, and then somebody else on the other end, Biden's on the other end, much more conventional, much more comfortable, much more traditional. So because let's say Bernie does come out of New Hampshire and out of Iowa with momentum, will that necessarily translate well into the other states where there's more conservative Democratic voters?
I think he's got a problem if he comes out as the winner in either Iowa or New Hampshire. Here's why. I think one of the problems the Democrats have is that both Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are so far to the left of the mainstream Democrats that they run the risk of alienating the party. Yeah. And keep in mind what happened in 2016. Even though Hillary was lucky enough to win the popular vote by 3 million, she still lost the election because of the Electoral College.
Right.
Those dynamics have not changed in those Rust Belt states that much. So the last thing the Democrats need to do is to move to the left, when moving to the center and to the right is what got Trump into office to begin with. So I think it's going to have to be that Democrats overall pick a candidate that can beat Donald Trump. Not as easy as it sounds.
But is that still in effect? The traditional wisdom on this that Biden is the one that fills that bill. He's the one that could beat Trump. I mean, really, considering all the fractions and all the factions of the voting population now, I mean, it's hard for one candidate to attract enough of a coalition to be sold mainstream nationwide, wouldn't you say?
I think that's true. And I think all you have to do is look back to 2016 to see what Bernie Sanders did not do for Hillary Clinton after they made that tremendous pact in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where he endorsed her for president and said he would work for her election. Well, he did a few things for her, but there wasn't any rousing set of rallies in favor of Hillary Clinton. And I think that's part of the problem. If Sanders people who are very rabid about him feel that he has been given the hose again, as he was in 2016, the Democrats run the risk of having them stay home. And that elects Donald Trump to a second term.
Perhaps also we should talk about the changing demographic of New Hampshire now. In the old days, when I was a reporter up there and when you were in Connecticut and watching New Hampshire closely, back then it was a much more conservative state, much more of one mind politically, whether you were a Republican or a Democrat. But now there's been such an invasion perhaps, of people from Massachusetts spilling over the border in New Hampshire. So, and a lot of those are liberals, are they not? And does that not change the political nature of New Hampshire.
Well, I'm sure it does. We just had the Democrats take over the legislature here for the first time in years. We have 2 Democratic senators. The only Republican in statewide office is John Sununu, who is the governor, and that's it. We have 2 Democratic Congress people. So we are definitely what they call a purple state. And I think that how much of that remains purple in this election is still up for grabs. And it all depends on who that candidate is. We get back to that. The last thing you want to do is have a candidate who starts in with such a strident agenda that he alienates middle stream voters of independent persuasion. And that's the hook here. There's still more independents than there are members of the political parties. And that's the problem.
In terms of proximity, who has the advantage? Warren from Massachusetts or Bernie Sanders from neighboring Vermont? Is it a wash there?
No, I think Sanders has the edge here, but not by much. Latest poll shows them within a point of each other. And latest poll also shows Biden is now the top dog in New Hampshire. Again, there's only a couple of points separating any of these candidates, including Buttigieg. So, it's anybody's guess at this point how New Hampshire voters are going to turn out. But in speaking of that, I think turnout is going to be a key. If you can get the base fired up for any of these candidates, that will determine who prevails.
All right. Also, now the impact of the Senate trial of President Trump occurs shortly. Isn't that going to interfere with the campaigning of Biden and Sanders and Warren? It will be keeping them in Washington rather than out on the campaign trail.
Well, it could. Keep in mind that the articles of impeachment, which are set to be turned over any time now, are going to require a lot of finessing before there's actually an agenda for what the trial will look like. That's still going to take a lot of work. And now there's a move, of course, to exclude some of the more strident voices of the Republican Party from being the president's lawyers in the Senate during this trial. They don't want Jim Jordan's and Devin Nunes to be over there spotting the same venom they did during the hearings. So I think that's going to take a while to shake out, during which both, or actually all 3, Sanders and Warren and some of the other candidates who were part of this whole thing are going to have a chance to go back to the hustings and see what's going on and make sure they try to make every effort to get every vote.
And lastly, what about what they're floating now about just canceling the trial? Well, what term are they using for that?
They want to just dismiss it.
Dismiss the trial. Is that at all constitutionally possible?
No, and they know it's not. It's just another, grandstanding move by Trump and his allies to try to keep the eye off the ball. This has to go to fruition. Right. No impeachment has not gone to fruition, and it's just not going to happen. And the talk of dismissal is what has solidified those 4 swing Republicans who are now mentioned as wanting to see and hear from witnesses in the trial into their positions. So if there was any chance of a dismissal, that took care of it.
But is there any way they could toss this back and forth? Maybe the Senate Republicans could pass a motion to consider it, to vote on it, even though it may be blatantly unconstitutional. They could hold it up a while before the Supreme Court may have to step in. Is that delay scenario possible?
It's possible. My suspicion is once this thing gets rolling, the momentum will be in favor of seeing what they can do with witnesses. One thing I'd caution about is the fact that this business about wanting to hear from witnesses by these 4 Republicans in the Senate and actually voting for a subpoena to get them to testify are 2 different things.
Yeah, well, again, we've been arguing this back and forth for a while now. In terms of the political mileage, I think Trump is going to get the most mileage out of this clearly, and the Democrats are going to lose miles of ground with this impeachment trial.
I don't know yet if that's true. I think, it could be that that is the case. It all depends on what else has not come out. If there's more dirt and much more spectacular dirt on Trump that has not yet made it to the public arena, then that doesn't bode well for the president. If there's nothing really new, if there's no real new bombshell in any of these witnesses that we're yet to hear from, then certainly Trump benefits because he's the one who's going to be squawking all the time and will have the bully pulpit during all of this.
I mean, from what's come out so far and what they've been harping on so far and what they've been stretching so far, it doesn't appear that they've got that kind of a smoking gun. It could come later with tax revelations or whatever, but for what they have now, it doesn't look like they're going to have some kind of a dramatic revelation so egregious, so offensive that it's going to turn the mass of American voters against Trump. Would you not agree?
Well, 66% of people surveyed in the latest poll that I saw as we taped this interview want to hear from witnesses. That's tremendous in terms of the type of support that represents. Impeachment was not nearly that strong. So I think that we could be turning a corner here among independent voters, and even among some Republicans, because 39% of the Republicans surveyed say they want to hear from witnesses too. That's tremendously different from the political posturing that you see in the Senate.
Well, we'll soon see if it really reflects the way voters on both sides of the aisle feel. Bryant Thomas, a longtime AP newsman, now a political commentator in the first in the nation primary state of New Hampshire. Thanks for being with us.
You bet.